of the stuff that most of the stuff that I'll talk about is like a mix of my experiences across different companies, right? So like Nalin already pointed out, let me maybe skip over to my intro slide. I think customary tech issues are always there. Let's see.
What would be our lives without that?
Yeah. Right. So yeah, just like quickly doing a very brief introduction. So I'm currently at MakeMyTrip. I lead the horizontal products and growth here. And in the past, I've done both mobile products and Adtech, where Adtech is where I actually experience the B2B side of it, right? And then in the past, I've worked at Hotstar in movie, etc. I tried, so for some reason or whatever, right, I kind of stumbled into product management, right? Because when I started my career, maybe product management was not as hot or was not known as like a separate sort of functional area, right? So very few companies back then used to have product roles. So I kind of started off in digital marketing, did analytics, online analytics for some time, and then eventually sort of moved into product, and that's where I've been for the last like 10 plus years, right? So so in some sense, just by sheer luck or whatever happened played out in my career, I ended up sort of experiencing the role from like multiple sides, the entire sort of digital spectrum. Right. Like Nalin already pointed out, I do a lot of I do share a lot of content on multiple platforms, and primarily it's a habit that I've picked up just to basically keep my thoughts flowing, and sometimes just writing them down basically helps me crystallize my own thought process, right? So it's not just helping the community, it helps me as well, right? So I do share a fair bit on all the different platforms. Mute me if you don't, if you start following me, and if you don't like my content, please feel free to mute me, but you'll see a lot of content coming your way if you are following me on any of the platforms. But so let's quickly move on. So largely, by and large, the focus of this talk would be how to identify large opportunities which will actually move the needle, right? And having like run product management both as an individual contributor and now as a product lead, which leads where I lead a fairly large team. I've seen a common pattern across like multiple different scenarios, both in B2C and B2B, and different sort of areas, right? So I've done monetization, I've done video streaming, right? I've done online travel, right? So I've experienced the entire 9 yards from many different domains, right? And what I've noticed again and again is that the same sort of patterns or the same sort of things kind of emerge over and over again, right? So that is what I'm going to talk about. So let's quickly sort of dive in. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is basically in every organization, right? There are certain truisms or there are certain facts that are floated around all the time, right? So for example, this is an example from my InMobi days, right? So where when I just joined the company, right, I had no background in Adtech. I was coming in from MakeMyTrip, which obviously is a completely consumer-led product, and it's in a completely different field, which is online travel, right? So these are some of the sort of facts that were banded about in the organization, right? So for example, and you would hear this over and over again in multiple organizations, right? So when you join a product team, which has a fair bit of legacy, right? So things like, we need to add more use cases to the core product because the current set of use cases are not able to drive adoption of the product. Another fact that was put around was no one ever uses self-serve. Let's just focus on managed accounts model, right? So we should have a sales team or sort of partner managers that basically talk to all the enterprise customers and then basically try and convert them rather than investing in a self-serve and getting customers on board through that mechanism, right? Another truism that was floated around was so basically the way InMobi basically serves ads on different apps is by giving an SDK to their partners, right? Very similar to what MoEngage does as well, right? So so InMobi basically provides an SDK to their customers, which they integrate into their apps, and then they are eventually able to run ads through InMobi, right? So another truism that used to be floated around was, let's not do SDKs. Customers don't prefer SDKs because of multiple reasons. They don't like third-party code in their apps. It increases the size of their apps, right? So on and so forth. Let's add an API integration touch point so that then basically customers can continue to run ads, but without the sort of downsides of increased app size or third-party code or issues around privacy, right? So InMobi had a fairly controversial history on the privacy front. So like customers were also worried what kind of data your SDK is collecting, etc., right? So these were touted as facts when I joined the organization, right? Now, what's the problem? So what exactly is the problem here, right? So it almost appears like, if you go back to that slide, it almost appears like there are a lot of insights on this slide, right? 3 or 4 things have been spoken, right? So when I joined the team, it was like, here are some of these facts that are true for our team, right? Or for our product line. Let's just focus, let's just double down on these facts, right? And then try and build a product that basically obviously is based on these insights and hopefully serves customers better, right? But what is the problem, right? I would love to hear from you guys. Do you think there is a problem in the kind of insights that were given to me when I joined the team? Any thoughts, any comments?
I think you have probably masked them as facts, but they are largely the opinions.
Right, absolutely. So this is a problem, right? So 90% of facts that are banded around in organizations are actually opinions, right? Though they masquerade as facts, but they're actually just loose opinions thrown about without any discipline, right? Without any actual discipline around trying to understand the customer really well, trying to nail their use cases really well. And this is true in a lot of large organizations, even true in smaller organizations, but especially true when the team scale, right? When the product line scale, right? When the product manager is actually 3 orders of magnitude away from the eventual customer, because there is a sales team, there is an onboarding team, so on and so forth, right? And this happens a lot. You'd actually be surprised to see how often this happens over and over again, right? So exactly what Nalin pointed out. The first problem is completely inside out view, right? So people have derived these opinions based on some hearsay, right? And it's like, our product needs more use cases because we don't have adoption, right? There is no customer lens to it, right? What is it that I need to do to actually drive adoption is not really, it's not very clear from that opinion, right? So it's just been projected as a possible solution, but we don't even know whether that's truly a problem with the customer, right? Totally anecdotal evidence happens a lot. Total hearsay, no scientific measurements. It is not evident that, you know what, 10 out of 12 customers actually pointed this as a problem. Maybe some business development guy basically went to the customer's place, right? Spoke to him, picked up a few nuggets from the conversation here and there. Obviously, every person is biased, including PMs, right? So everyone tends to pick up on nuggets that either they understand easily or they are sort of biased towards, right? So again, very anecdotal, no scientific measurement, right? So stuff like that happens a lot. And not enough context, right? So if someone came to you and said, you know what, we need to reduce the SDK size, we immediately jump onto that as a solution, because you know what, reducing SDK size is being potentially called out as a big barrier to adoption. We don't even know what was the context of the app developer in that particular case, right? Maybe he comes from a specific vertical where large app sizes are not really a problem, right? Maybe he comes from a vertical where he already has like 10 different third-party SDKs already integrated. So maybe he's not open to integrating another 11th third-party SDK, right? But a lot of app developers might be completely open, right? So we don't really know, right? So a lot of cases, what happens is information comes to you without a lot of context around it, right? And that basically hampers understanding, that basically limits your understanding of the end customer or end user, right? So that happens a lot. So we'll move on to, so if these are some of the problems out there, right? So there is information asymmetry. In a lot of cases, product managers are not doing enough to understand the customer, right? In a lot of cases, maybe the stack itself, sometimes a lot of PMs feel that the stack itself is too technical and find it hard to basically understand the complexity of what really it is all about, where exactly the customer is feeling the pinch or the pain point, right? But ultimately, end of the day, as product managers, you will be able to get good insights, and you will be able to build on those insights only if you taste your product yourself, right? You have to dog food your product. So I'll give you an example here, right? So these are actually, so when I joined InMobi, right, exactly the truisms that I faced when I joined the team, right? And unfortunately, I was the product manager for the SDK integration touchpoint, right? So when I come into the organization, I'm told that, you know what, SDK doesn't really work. Let's put out an API touchpoint. And I'm like, why, right? Why is this fact being floated around? Let's figure out what is the problem with the SDK, right? Let's see what kind of experience an app developer goes through when he integrates my SDK, right? I wanted to sort of experience the entire 9 yards, right? I didn't want to get influenced by uh, facts and opinions being floated around, right? I wanted to experience the complete thing myself. So what did I do? I basically wrote a very simple test app, right? You can see the screenshots. It's basically a single screen app with nothing on it, right? And I took the InMobi SDK and basically integrated into my app just enough to basically be able to show the ad, right? And just enough to basically experience the entire integration process, right? And what that did was basically just, it was a complete game changer for me, right? So the first 3 weeks, right? A, I didn't have any Adtech context. B, I did not have a whole lot of context on how exactly, what is the real product experience like, right? When I put in that effort, it wasn't too big an effort, right? Writing a toy app or a test app is pretty straightforward. It's not a big deal. But when I put in that effort, it just opened up my mind to exactly what the challenges were, what the bottlenecks were. And it also sort of baselined my expectations with respect to how good or bad, because I did have some experience integrating other third-party SDKs for Make My Trip app, right? So I did have some prior experience as to what a typical SDK integration looks like, as at least as a PM. So when I integrated the InMobi SDK, I was actually able to baseline that experience vis-a-vis the other experiences that I've gone through, right? So this is something that I will sort of exhort more and more, right? That irrespective of whatever your situation is, irrespective of how complex the tech stack is, make your engineers your friends and do experience your product. Whatever it takes, do experience it, because only then you actually get real insights exactly where the challenges are, right? So dog fooding, don't take the easy way out, even if it's a fairly technical product. Let's say you are product manager for, let's say, geolocation APIs, right? Just integrate it out, right? A very simple web app, just integrate it out and just see what the experience feels like, right? It will just supercharge your insights to another level altogether. So what dog fooding does, right? I already spoke at length, but basically it basically just opens up your mind to all the distinct steps or all the distinct pains that your user has to go through. In this case, an app developer, or it could be let's say a partner integration specialist, right? So what are the key bottlenecks in integrating your product? Do your test payloads work, right? So for example, it's not just about the SDK integration experience, right? So if I have to test out your SDK, and let's say in the case of InMobi, for example, you wanted to test out like 4 different ad formats, right? Every SDK serves multiple different use cases, right? So for all of those use cases, you need a test harness. If you want a video ad, you should be able to request a video ad. If you want a video ad with a certain call to action at a certain point of time, you should be able to request that. What I found out in my case was the core SDK experience was pretty well, but the test harnesses just didn't work. Like you couldn't, if you wanted to sort of experience a specific kind of video ad with, let's say, a card coming at the end of the video ad, you could not request it, right? So even if your core experience works, you are not able to test it out, right? So that's a problem, right? And then how easy it is to debug when something goes wrong. This again, again, the core experience was good, but in a lot of cases, I was running into issues where when I was trying to integrate it and something was going wrong, right? I was finding it very, very hard to debug it, because my product would just not give out enough verbose sort of logging exactly what went wrong, right? So it just used to throw cryptic sort of logging messages saying that, you know what, something went wrong. I don't really know what mistake I made, right? So stuff like that, you get that level of granular insight only when you experience the pain yourself. Howsoever user research you may do, customer interviews you may do, and yes, customer interviews are a great way of getting insights, but you may do as much as you can, but you will still not be able to replicate the exact pain, right? It almost becomes sticky in your brain when you actually experience that pain yourself. Next step is, first step obviously is dog fooding your product, and that gives you a lot of insights as to where exactly the pain points are, where exactly you can move the needle, right? The second part of it is just understanding every micro step, right? I'll just give an example. So let's just take the example of integration, right? So when a PM, right, comes in, right, and he does not really understand all the different steps involved in integration, for him, integration is just one large black box, right, to be taken care by the engineering teams. That it is the engineering team's responsibility to basically ship out a product that gives a good, smooth integration experience to the customer, right? But if I just blow it up, right? So what are the steps? See, ultimately everyone is a human being, right? So if you think of your developers persona or developers audience, the actual integration step is a bunch of different sort of discrete steps, right? So example, it could be things like, first the developer might be reading up the documentation, right? Then he might be test driving your sample apps. So you might have put out some sample apps for a particular product, right? So he might need to build them, right? You may have put them on GitHub. He will build them, he will test drive them, right? Third thing is, after looking at the sample apps, he will get a good understanding of how exactly this integration works. He will probably write some code and test some integration. Fourth step is, maybe he will run into certain issues, maybe ask questions around specific scenarios, if he's not able to sort of find a solution for that. And eventually, hopefully things go well. Eventually he's able to take the entire thing live, right? So if you if as a PM you are not thinking about every single step, right? So almost think of it like a classic sort of consumer product funnel, right? So for example, at Make My Trip, when I look at sort of product experiences, right, what do? I look at individual steps, right? How many people come to the flight's landing page, right? Out of those, how many of them basically search for a flight? Then out of those, how many people move on to the flight details page? Out of those, how many people move on to the review page? How many people make the payment? Eventually get to a successful flight booking order, right? Flight booking, right? Something similar is true in enterprise world also. It's not just one step, right? It is like a classic consumer funnel. You have to apply your funnel sort of, you have to bring your funnel thinking or stepwise thinking to the entire sort of product orchestration, right? And to think about what all you can do to basically serve your customer best at each step of the funnel, right? And you might be missing out a lot of customers. A lot of your customers might be dropping off at each of these steps, right? You don't know, right? Because we have not really put a lot of mind or a lot of thinking to actually just blowing up that entire thing and actually looking at it step by step, looking at every step's data. Maybe you are also instrumenting some of this data, right, through customer interviews or whatever, and you actually understand where the leaks are, where the drops are, right? Once you understand that, once you nail that, you will actually obviously be able to do a much better job of it, right? So understanding every leaky step is really, really important. And this is where the consumer product side of it or the consumer thinking side of it actually comes in like really, really strongly, right? How do you address some of these leaky buckets? You have to support all kinds of tooling, right? So example, I'll give you a very sort of broad example, right? So imagine you want to build an Android app, right? To build that Android app, you need a development environment where you can build that, right? So when Google came out with Android, they didn't tell you that, you know what, you have to go to a Linux terminal, actually build your apps there, right? They shipped it with a nice sort of Eclipse was the integrated development environment which was used to do Java. They developed a nice plugin for it so that you could do Android development there, right? So you need a lot of tooling to support your developers, right? Obviously, documentation, it is paramount. I will give you some good examples of how other companies, successful companies, have done it really, really well. Self-serve, again, a very, very important sort of pillar of driving growth, right? Because yes, managed accounts are good, sales-led business is good, but nothing can basically, if you can get the flywheel of self-serve going for your customers and you are able to onboard a lot of small and medium companies just through your self-serve, nothing like it, right? That just unlocks a different level of growth. Building a good self-serve is hard. Getting people to onboard all by themselves is hard. But if you are able to sort of unlock that flywheel, that just gives you so much more flexibility, so much more room, right? Sample apps, again, sort of pretty sort of self-explanatory. You can have all the documentation in the world, but sample apps is where the rubber hits the road, right? So if you have good, nice sample apps, right, which exactly illustrate all the different large use cases that your SDK is used for, right? In this particular case, obviously, that gives much more intuitive understanding to the developer than all the reams of documentation that you have written ever would, right? Then obviously touch basing on all the different common integration scenarios. If there are like 5 different integration scenarios, it does not help to just have like one linear documentation talking about one sort of monolithic documentation talking about here are those 50 steps, and let the developer figure out which are the steps are relevant for me, right? If you cut it out, slice it out again by a like a consumer product manager, right? If you slice it out by the different use cases, segment it out, right? Very clear documentation, segment it out, or give very clear examples, right? Maybe give video tutorials. That helps in this case a developer much more than just sort of dumping all the information in his face, right? Give you examples, right? So let's talk examples, enough theory, right? So this is an example of Twilio. Twilio is basically, think of it like a last mile integration SDK for communications, right? So if you want to send out an SMS, right? If you want to send out an emailer, right? Stuff like that. Twilio does it really well. They're a very large successful company in enterprise sort of communication space. Now look at on the left side, I have an example of how do they do like very personalized onboarding for someone coming on, right? So this is what I'm talking about. It is not just about the SDK alone, or it is not just about your core product. All the 360-degree sort of tooling or everything in support of everything that you build in to make your product successful, everything needs to be A+, right? So this is how nicely they do the onboarding, right? So what Twilio product are you here to use, and what do you want to build with Twilio, right? So they now have a suite of like 4 or 5 different products, including video conferencing, etc. Right? So they basically take that input and then accordingly personalize the entire documentation / onboarding experience for the user, right? And within that also they are asking whether you want to have like very detailed code, or you want to start off with some starter code with minimal sort of configuration, or you just want to sort of kickstart with our sample apps, right? So this is where the consumer product mindset comes in, and this is how you sort of you give a very personalized onboarding experience to your user. Ultimately, a developer is also like an end user like you and me, right? So if you give that personalized experience, obviously your sign up rates, your activation rates, your actual successful integration rates will go up, right? On the right side is an example from the documentation, right? So 90% of the companies, what do? They just throw out the API documentation in the developer's face. Boss, take this, here it is, read it, figure it out on your own, right? What these guys are doing is basically starting off slow, right? Like a master would explain to a disciple or a student, right? So first they are explaining, you know what the different moving parts are, right? With a very nice block diagram, right? Which sort of instills the concept in your brain that, you know what, okay, so this is specifically their video conferencing product, right? So this is how the client application talks to your application server. This is exactly where Twilio basically fits into the puzzle, right? So they start with a large sort of macro picture, and then based on that they ask you, so in which direction do you want to go, right? And then based on that they again personalize the entire documentation experience, the entire sort of onboarding experience for the user, right? So all of these things help, right? So it's not just that Twilio made a great video conferencing SDK or a great SMS SDK and they're done. It doesn't work. Ultimately, every step can be a leaky bucket and can sort of hamper your adoption, your product adoption, right? So you have to look after everything. Okay, another example. So this example I really liked, right? So this is another sort of a new sort of upstart from India only. I know the founders, right? Again, a video conferencing product, 100 ms, right? So they do a beautiful job of basically describing all the error codes and exactly what needs to be done. Look at cause of the error and action to be taken, right? Absolutely making it very clear to your end user, in this case a developer, that boss, this is the problem, this is what you need to do, right? 90% of products you see in the market, if you go to their documentation, it would not have anything like this, right? It will probably not even sort of describe all the different errors that might happen, right? And you know what, they don't just do in the documentation, right? The right way of doing it is to actually, when you are integrating the product, right, your SDK should also, so whatever is here actually has been instrumented in the SDK, right? So it has been instrumented in the core product itself, this experience, right? So where every time something bad happens, they throw out the error and they also log within the product itself. They don't have to come to the documentation section to actually figure it out. The SDK itself logs that this is what you need to do, right? That is a beautiful experience for the user. Today, what happens, most of the software products, they just throw the error in your face and bang, now you go figure it out. You go to Stack Overflow, you go to YouTube, you go to Google, you figure out what went wrong, right? But that is not the right way of approaching this, right? If you are a PM who cares about the smallest of things and basically giving a delightful experience to the user, this is what you need to do with your product, right? Now imagine the SDK itself is talking to the developer, right? That this is what you need to do. What better could it be? How, like, it cannot get better than this, right? Another example, again from Twilio. So this is another example, again talking about the tooling, the support platform, right? So again, Twilio has this support platform where universal search works, right? You can just type in your text, right? Again, you don't have to scroll through scroll through a lot of links, right? Navigate across a lot of links. You just go to their help center, type exactly the issue that you are facing, right? They built a beautiful universal search interface, and it automatically starts throwing up results. Now, if you look at the results, you'll find that this not only covers the technical cases, it also covers the business cases, right? Because ultimately buying a software, adopting a software is both business plus product plus tech, right? So look at this example, estimating pricing for Twilio programmable video, right? That is the level of support you need to go to the user, right? Why should the user have only one way of getting to know the pricing, which is like talk to the sales team, right? If you really care about adoption, if you really want your self-serve to work beautifully, right, you solve for all the, like, you basically figure out all the different personas at every stage in the product buying / adoption journey, right? And you solve for that in your knowledge base, right? Why just restrict yourself to technical stuff in the knowledge base? The knowledge base also talks about pricing, right? Or at least gives you some kind of baseline around how the pricing works, right? So that the user is able, or some business guy, or even the technical architect or the VP of engineering is able to estimate, you know what, this is going to cost us this much, right? Is set up that baseline expectation, right? So that is what these guys do, like, really, really nicely. So if you are able to unearth all of these sort of customer pain points, it can really give you very good lift, right, in terms of growth. I'll give you a personal example from my Make My Trip journey. So this is, I was leading the trains vertical at Make My Trip, right? And if you have ever traveled in trains, right, and if you have booked train tickets, right, this is what I was talking about, right? Going deep into the customer sort of mindset, understanding the customer cycle, right? If you have ever booked trains, you would realize that trains is a very supply starved vertical, right? There are 30 million train travelers travel in India every single day, right? There is not enough train tickets out there than is the demand for it, right? A lot of people want to travel by trains because it's a reasonably economical sort of mode of transport, right? So the typical construct in trains is basically you end up getting what is known as a waitlisted ticket, right? You basically come, pay up the money, but eventually you get a waitlisted ticket because the supply is already sort of booked out, right? There are not enough train seats available or train berths available. So what we launched under, like, we went deep into this problem, right? That ultimately your core problem of traveling from point A to point B via train is not getting solved, right? On top of that, you're basically paying money to get into the queue, right? You're paying money to basically get a waitlisted ticket, which at the end of it is not even solving your core problem, right? So the question we asked ourselves is, how can I make the customer journey better? Why even pay money to get into the queue, right? So which is why we launched something like book now, pay on confirmation, right? So you book a waitlisted ticket today. If you book on IRCTC or you book offline at a train station, you end up paying money. But if you book at Make My Trip, you don't have to pay any money if it's a waitlisted ticket, right? And once the ticket gets confirmed, then you pay the amount that is due, right? Else, in any case, the ticket gets cancelled, and irrespective, we don't really end up paying any money to IRCTC as Make My Trip, right? Because the ticket got cancelled. So irrespective, all the money will come back to us, right? So even if the customer did not pay upfront and we took the credit risk on behalf of the customer, let's say the customer wanted to make a booking of 1,000 rupees, I would have paid 1,000 rupees to IRCTC on customer's behalf. I took on the credit risk, but once the ticket got cancelled because it did not get confirmed, auto cancelled, so the money will come back to me, right? So we thought about this, we thought about the value proposition to the user, we thought about, went deep into the customer pain point, and we built something like this. And believe it or not everyone knows that MakeMyTrip offer has a train booking option. Our CTC is like the giant in this space. They do 1 million tickets a day. We used to do 5,000 tickets a day, right? So it's an order of magnitude, it's 2 orders of magnitude difference. But immediately as soon as we launched, we went from 5,000 tickets to 8,000 tickets a day. So that was the kind of impact that we saw when we built something like this, right? Which is why establishing those facts and getting away from those opinions is like super important, right? Okay, just to sort of clarify in this, unfortunately IRCTC came back to us and shut us down, because obviously they saw that this was a great offering that we were offering to our customers. They control the supply, being the government organization that they are. They came back to us and shut us down. So unfortunately we couldn't do much, but for the time it was live, it was a fantastic product. It worked really beautifully. So the next thing I talked about, so the first part I talked about, any questions? Sorry, I'm going in at my own pace. I'm not stopping to ask if you have any questions. If you have, please feel free to ask me. Happy to answer as we go along.
Do we ask now or probably at the end?
Feel free to ask now as well. It's fine.
So just as you were giving the MakeMyTrip example, right? So I think that's a great example of how you run experiments and drive product growth. So my question was, did you find it was easier to sort of run experiments in a B2C or let's say a MakeMyTrip versus at your time, let's say in InMovie, which was more B2B driven, the Adtech business as well. So what were the challenges you had when you were running experiments at InMovie, and how did you possibly overcome them?
Great question, Aniket. So yes, getting insights and running experiments in a B2B environment is far more challenging than B2C, right? Because B2C, you have traffic to play with, right? But in B2B also, there are ways to basically run those experiments, right? So like something that used to happen a lot at InMovie and maybe happens a lot at other organizations as well, is that build out a lot of features, right? And just throw it out and see what sticks, right? Because when you are building out an SDK, obviously there is an adoption. First, the customer needs to take on the latest version. Then there is an adoption cycle, right? And eventually when you get to see the metrics, it's like probably 3 months, 4 months are gone, right? And that is where the problem is, right? If you go out with the wrong thing right in front and then you get feedback further 4 months, 5 months down the line, then right? So it becomes even more important to basically be able to have a way to validate your ideas before you throw something out, right? And the way to do it would be to basically, let's say, have a beta cycle, right, to your product, right? Or maybe work with some marquee customers, right? Maybe tell them that, you know what, we want to work very closely with you, align on goals. So for example, in Movie's case, what I used to do was talk to, let's say, Zynga, right? Or maybe a Shazam, right? And tell them that, you know what, my goals are aligned with you. I want you to make money. In return, I want you to help me, help me by giving me early feedback on my products, right? And hopefully we will be collectively be able to unearth something that will benefit you and will also benefit me, right? So a beta cycle, getting on board some marquee customers and basically getting them aligned to commit some engineering bandwidth to basically test out some of the features, right? Or even before getting there, maybe even run some ideas past them, right? If I have a certain idea, I don't want to just throw it out there and just see whether it sticks, right? I would rather go talk to a few of my large sort of customers and see whether that idea is making sense to me, right? So that was the only way. And then we used to do a lot of remote instrumentation, right? What we used to call as telemetry, right? As to how the user is using, what he's using, right? So both are on our onboarding funnels, right? So we used to, at least I start tracking, because I was coming from a B2C background, I start tracking how many people are signing up every day, right? On my self-serve, how many people are actually downloading the SDK, how many people actually start sending me some test API calls, whether that volume is increasing over a period of time. Give me some directional indicators of whether I'm doing well or not. If you don't have those metrics in place, you are in any case gone. So at least my thing was to actually bring in my B2C discipline to the B2B environment, where at least take a stab at instrumenting the metrics. So like for example, a big issue with at least the InMobi SDK, at least on Android platforms, were the crashes. Especially problematic because you offer a bunch of very different ad formats. The integration might have been done wrongly, right? B, especially in China, where InMobi has a large market, the customized sort of Chinese sort of Android versions didn't use to help, right? Now, every time a crash would happen, there would be a lot of noise. Oh, the SDK does not work, right? Our product is buggy. And this was my experience in the first week, right? And when I went back to the team and asked them, do we have any crash metrics in place? They said no. So everything was hearsay, no measurement, right? So we actually like begged my VP engineering to basically build out a telemetry module immediately, right? And what I started doing was started sending out, even before someone would come and make a hue and cry about the SDK, I started transparently sending fortnightly crash metrics of the SDK based on number of live sessions that are happening with the SDK and how many of those sessions are actually impacted by an SDK crash. And I started publishing out some number, right? Let's say that number was whatever, 99.9% crash-free sessions. That just reduced all the noise around the stability of the SDK, right? It just solved all of those problems, right? So just having those metrics in place just helped me a lot, create a lot more clarity on where I need to focus. Otherwise, what was happening was every time a crash would happen, oh, let's get into a war room and let's just solve this problem then and there. I'm like, is it really a problem? Can I not focus on my core roadmap and just keep doing this every single day? I don't think that was working for me. So I went down that path.
Got it. This is super, super helpful. I just had one follow-up question to it.
Yeah.
So you spoke about talking to customers as well. So probably in B2B, it helps because you have large customers, but limited in number. But at organization scale, like at Hotstar and Make My Trip. So as a PM, how did you manage to get in touch with the end customer? Maybe whether it is to run experiments or just to get some feedback. Which I'm just very curious how it happens in a organization that scale up for Make My Trip or Hotstar.
Right. So B2C, it is very straightforward, right? You just have to look at your web analytics data, or you basically, what we do is we do a lot of user research. So we do have a user research team, right? Dedicated user research team, right? Especially if I have to sort of try out some hypothesis, which is going to be fairly engineering intensive. We just do a bunch of user research and then we break it down across different personas, right? So not only we do it in tier 1 cities, we also go to tier 2 cities, right? We go to go to different kinds of user bases, right? So we go to a slightly affluent audience working in let's say an IT job is like someone who runs maybe a small shop in, let's say, Jhansi, right? So we try to cover a large spectrum of our users and see where exactly this is working, right? That's the discipline as a PM, as to like you need to cover all the different important personas and segments that you care about. You cannot just derive insights basis that, oh, I just went to did a small user research in Delhi in Sheraton Hotel where only the rich and premium guys came. They gave me some insights, I took it and I assumed it as gospel truth and started building my product, right? So that doesn't work, right? So you have to sort of think about all the different user segments that your app caters to, and obviously your in-house data, your web analytics data tells you that a lot. In the case of InMobi, I did find it much harder, because not only did I want to talk to large customers where at least maybe you have a dedicated single point of contact to whom you are talking, I also wanted to talk to a lot of small indie developers, right? I wanted to talk to maybe app developers who are enterprising, but again, sort of medium size, right? So what I started doing was, I actually started running some small sort of widgets, surveys on my onboarding website saying that, hey, would you love to give feedback to me, right? Start putting that on my onboarding documentation portal as well, support.inmobi.com, right? And we were able to get a few leads, right? Then obviously my product marketing teams were doing a bunch of webinars where a lot of people were signing up, right? So we had their email IDs and phone numbers, right? So using all of that, I was able to access quite a few developers and was actually able to speak to them. What happens in the B2B world, and this is true of me also, right? There is a lot more friction in basically getting to talk to a real guy, right? You have to first collect their phone numbers, somehow find a way to reach out to them. but that exercise has to be done. So initially, when I went to InMobi, I also found it a little hard, right? Because I was so used to like getting insights immediately. Like, yeah, who will put in all this effort to basically go speak to so many developers, this, that. But ultimately, I realized the more I postpone that decision, the more I'm increasing the pain for myself. If I don't do it immediately, I'll keep on shipping stuff that I don't even know whether it is going to work or not. Right. So just doing all of that was like really, really helpful. Especially the product marketing counterparts. As a product guy in enterprise space, in B2B space, you should be working very, very closely with your product marketing counterparts, including the kind of landing pages, the kind of content. It's hard. And similarly, reach outs to developers or even your partner service, right? So we had this last mile integration team, which we used to call partner services. Even they were able to sort of at least put me in touch with some of the large customers.
God. Thanks, Anurag. Super helpful.
Sure. Okay, so moving on. So the next step is, okay, so you made your product great. How do you sort of solve for the distribution problem, right? Distribution is again not a problem that is to be solved by your sales guys alone, right? You have to think very, very deeply about how exactly can you get your product in the user, in sort of your customer consideration phase when he's thinking about integrating something, right? Then how does he discover your product? When he discovers your product, what kind of experience he gets? Hopefully you have solved the experience part of it. So how do you distribute, right? So this is the segment I want to talk about, right? So first, just switching the example a little bit, let me start with the consumer example first. Right. So one thing I love to say over and over again in different sort of be it B2B or B2C context is you have to go where users are, right? So for example, again, taking a train example. So in train, like it is not just about ticket booking because there's a lot of sort of uncertainty with respect to whether your ticket got confirmed or even if you have a confirmed ticket, whether train is running on time or not. There's this entire ecosystem of train information services, what we call as RIS, rail information services or train information services. Now, I could have built a product offering within my app, which I actually have today, right? Where the user comes to my app and basically looks up the train running information, right? Let's say, for example, in this particular case, you can see someone has booked a Rajdhani, right? And he's trying to see whether the Rajdhani is running on time or not running on time. You can obviously come to my app and basically check it out, right? But a better thing to do is not just piggyback on a platform which the user is very comfortable using, right? So we launched the same information services on WhatsApp as well, right? And we saw crazy amount of adoption, right? So WhatsApp had launched this WhatsApp Business API back then, right? And then we basically used that WhatsApp Business API to start where a user could come just on my WhatsApp business account. He could just sort of give me the train number. You can see in the screenshot 12309, and immediately we start giving him the running status, right? Or the second screenshot is the PNR status. You just type in your PNR and basically give you the PNR status. Automatically, on its own, it started getting organic adoption. At its peak, it had 100,000 daily users of the service. At which point this our CEO basically came to us and said, why are you building a dependency on WhatsApp? So that was another strategic business call. But you can see that not only did it see a lot of organic adoption, it actually started getting featured in the media without even us sort of trying to sort of attempt to basically send out a public PR. We didn't do anything of that sort. Automatically, it got picked up by a lot of business houses, a lot of media houses, because obviously convenient, right? You went onto a platform and it's super convenient for the end users. So they were happy to sort of feature it. We were happy that we were getting a lot of organic adoption, right? So clearly you have to basically go where the users are, right? Like distribution gets solved automatically when you sort of piggyback on a platform where your users already are. Right. I'll give you another example, not a product example. I wanted to put in a fun example as well. Right. This guy, Daniel Vasallo, right? Ex-AWS engineer, right? Ex-engineer at Amazon Web Services. Right. So he started writing, becoming very, very active on Twitter sometime in, I think, 2019, just a year before COVID, right? He had just resigned from AWS. He wanted to sort of live the indie life, right? He wanted to be a freelancer of sorts. not really a software freelancer. He just wanted to try out a bunch of different stuff, but he basically didn't want to sort of continue in a corporate job, right? So this guy started in 2019, built a following of, like, he was very clear that Twitter is the right place, right? He didn't go on LinkedIn, he didn't go to some of the other channels, he didn't go to Reddit, right? He felt that Twitter was the right audience for his kind of stuff that he was going to share, right? And within like couple of years, he was able to amass a following of nearly 100,000 followers, right? So while it says joined March 2009, I know that this guy became active in 2019, right? I started following him back then. He basically gained a followership of 100,000 odd followers. And what he realized was that people were interacting a lot with his content, right? So he started sort of putting together some content products, right? Some kind of simple courses, right? For example, a course on AWS, etc. And he was able to get to a revenue of $500,000 on Gumroad, right? Which he publicly shared, right? So this is what distribution is, right? His product is probably not the greatest, right? It's just a bunch of info products, content products, right? Just some PDFs, right? But just because of the distribution factor, he's wildly successful, right? Like $500,000, it takes enterprises a lot of effort to get to $500,000 run rate, and this guy has done it pretty much single-handedly, right? Just by focusing on the right platform, which was Twitter in this particular case, getting distribution. He first solved for distribution by sort of organic sharing of content, and eventually at some point of time, he basically sort of segmented into sort of paid content, and this is what the results were, right? So just again sort of showcasing how distribution basically trumps pretty much everything, right? Even if you don't have the best in class product, if you solve for distribution really well, you can basically get significant sort of impact, right? So again, going back to our enterprise sort of software space, right? So this is what Twilio does really well again, right? So not only do they have documentation, they also have for a lot of common use cases that they do. They, for example, how to make and receive phone calls. They have video sort of walkthroughs on YouTube, right? And look at the number of views. So 38,000 views, right? So people are finding value from these kinds of initiatives from Twilio, right? So if I want to integrate and make and receive phone calls, I don't need to really read through the boring documentation. The video walkthrough sort of helps me a lot, right? And again, this is a C# example. Obviously, they might have done it in Java, etc., right? So they do all of that, right? And the second example is basically the customer support, like the integration support example, which they do on Stack Overflow, right? So on the right, they have the Stack Overflow sort of, so their developer evangelists basically respond to integration questions on Stack Overflow because they know that is where their developers are, right? So while you can put out all the different documentation in place, right, but ultimately it helps to basically respond to basically Stack Overflow questions. Now you might ask that, Anurag, this is more of an operations thing, right? It has nothing to do with, or content generation thing. This has nothing to do with product. Not really, because see, ultimately, end of the day, you also need to know what you can do from this is, if you understand, right? If let's say you can use Stack Overflow APIs, which are basically tagged with, let's say, Twilio, right? I'm a Twilio PM, right? Tagged with Twilio, right? And then basically I consume that API and start building a corpus of questions that is asked over and over again, right? And then using that corpus of questions that are being asked over and over again, maybe I put out a FAQ of sorts on Stack Overflow itself that, you know what, these are some of the most asked questions. Why don't you go ahead? And this has been sort of put together by actually parsing through all the different questions that have been asked on Stack Overflow, right? And you can put the same set of questions on your own in-house knowledge base as well, right? So when you look at it from that lens, right, you can productify even the content sort of part of it, right? Or at least help the content guys focus on what exactly needs to be done, right? Or at least help your developer evangelists focus on putting out what is the right scope of FAQ, right? So those are some of the things that really help, right? Okay. So next thing I'm going to talk about is vertical focus, right? So while software products tend to be horizontal, right, and there's almost like a platformish layer to software development thinking. And even like if you are a product manager in enterprise software product space, you tend to look at everything from a platform lens. But what I'm going to tell you here is that you get to win. Yes, the platform lens is important, but you win only with a very sharp vertical focus, right? In a lot of companies, in a lot of spaces, there are a lot of incumbents in space, right, who are probably putting in as much work as you are, right? So the only way to basically win, right, in very sharply contested markets, deeply contested markets, is by putting a lot of thought about what are your target verticals, where you can solve the problems really, really beautifully, and then just go about sort of seeding that through your entire sort of product experience. Let me give an example again. So 100 ms video conferencing product in a very heavily contested space, right? So obviously you have the big daddy Zoom, right? Then I showed you the Twilio example where they branched out from like SMS and email communication into video conferencing, right? There are a bunch of other sort of companies also out there which are doing some good work in this space. And now here is this upstart company 100 ms that wants to make a dent in video conferencing space. Very, very early stage still. I know the founder really well because he was an ex-colleague at Hotstar. So what did he do? He basically started out by thinking about the end user use cases, right? What are the typical sort of large use cases or typical verticals where video conferencing is used, right? He did not sort of take that video conferencing platform, only the video conferencing platform thinking to it, right? He talked about where exactly all the different use cases are, right? So he thought about all the different trends, right? So example, one big trend is the virtual events trend, right? Especially with COVID and all, you know that a lot of companies are trying to do live events, right? Virtual events, right? And virtual events not just require video conferencing, virtual events also require a lot of zing bang around, like people being able to put in their details, right? People being able to, switch between different sort of parallel events running on the sides. The event hosting guy wants to run a survey whether the event was useful, not useful, or particular session was useful, not useful, wants to run different kinds of polls, right? So within video conferencing space, virtual events itself is a very large emerging vertical that is completely playing out right now. If you have a video conferencing product and you basically give templatized approaches to, hey, you know what, you want to basically start a virtual, you want to basically create a virtual events product, here's a starter kit, right? So you just basically choose some flags on, choose some checkpoints on the onboarding tool, right? And within the SDK also, you start passing some flags that, you know what, I'm looking for video conferencing, right? You set a specific flag in the code, right? And automatically the entire experience basically gets customized around it, right? So you don't have to do a bunch of configs to basically tune your product to doing virtual events, right? So for example, in virtual events, one of the experiences, typically you want speaker in video mode and rest of the audience in audio mode, right? You just pass the flag, I want virtual events, and automatically the SDK tunes itself to saying that, okay, the speaker will be in video mode, rest of the audience will be in audio mode, right? So the developer does not have to go again and again, set like 10 different flags to basically get to the virtual events experience, right? For example, the second example is the audio room starter kit, which is the Clubhouse example, right? Again, Clubhouse was becoming popular. So he thought about it and he said that if you want to do, yes, I'm a video conferencing product, but if you want to do only an audio only room, this is how you do it. So not only he has done it on the onboarding experience, he has also done it specifically within the core SDK product also, right? And that is how you are able to convince the customers, right? Where a virtual events guy, he will say that, you know what, Zoom also has this capability, but I have to tweak like 50 different nuts and bolts to actually get to a virtual events product final outcome. I can just go with 100 ms who have solved this very, very beautifully, right? So bottom line is, you have to think about, you cannot just think about it as a platform thing. You also have to think about the super final end user use case and just solve for it very, very beautifully. Another example, so Next Billion, again, an Indian startup. Again, I know the founders. So these guys are into maps, right? So when I first heard maps, obviously I'm no closer to maps, right? As the normal layperson out there, right? Even I was worried, like, because the only thing that comes to your mind when you think about maps is Google Maps, right? Or maybe there are a bunch of other maps like Mapbox or TomTom, right? And like those companies have been out there for ages. Like, what are you guys trying to do within map space, right? And that is where they came with this entire approach, right? Where they said that We are here to basically just change the map space completely, right? We are not looking at it just as a platform, right? We are looking at it very specific to individual verticals. For example, trucking has emerged as a very large use case, and I want to give very customized offerings just for trucking. So in trucking, what kind of use cases are there? For example, different kind of vehicles, right? So for example, a Google Maps API does not give you like responses like point A to point B, how much time it will take. It does not take into account the weight of the vehicle, the type of the vehicle, right? Local stops, etc. Next Billion does it beautifully, right? Now, because they have customized their offering to trucking, they're able to build a narrative around it, which is what I've tried to show here. Guys, just give me 1 second. Sorry, guys. Sorry about that. So again, like I was talking about the map space. So these guys again have been able to sort of make a dent in map space mm, by focusing on very vertical specific things, right? And that has really helped them, right? So they've already touched 1 million ARR within like a year's time frame. They just raised their Series B, right? So and it's been going good for them, right? Any questions, comments? Okay, I'll move on then. So the last bit I wanted to talk about was how do you sort of, the last thing I wanted to talk about was that how do you sort of move the needle is by playing on an upcoming trend, right? At all points of time, there is something or the other happening, right? So for example, if I had to give you a travel example, we know that virtual events have become a trend, right? And Airbnb has been able, so even if you cannot go to Paris, you can experience Paris just virtually, right? Through 3D events, through sort of virtual walkthroughs, right? Where an influencer is basically just live streaming his entire experience in the city and basically sending it across to you, right? So this is what I'm talking about, right? When you have an upcoming trend and if you piggyback on it much earlier than anyone else in the market, you experience explosive growth, right? So let me give you another example, right? So for example, this company called Amplifier. So gaming itself, the two trends that are playing out very, very clearly. Gaming itself is a very, very large sort of trend that is playing out, right? Where a lot of people are getting into gaming, and now gaming is basically going to the so-called sort of AR experiences, VR experience, where you are starting to get into 3D gaming and all. So if you look at this stat, 2020 was YouTube's gaming's biggest year. So not only are people playing, they're also sharing a lot of gaming content, right? So what they're doing is they're recording their gameplay and basically sharing it on YouTube, right? And basically live streaming on platforms like Twitch and all, right? So this is what the insight was, right? That A, gaming is becoming big. B, on top of that, live streaming and community building is becoming big. So a lot of gamers are actually able to almost build a community or a fan following around them, right? That, you know what, just watch me play, right? And so Helsinki based amplifier, what they did was they understood that this is like a very, very important sort of trend that is playing out. So what they did was they created an SDK called Every Play, and they offered it to gaming publishers, said that, you know what, just put this SDK in. It allows your user to capture his gameplay footage really, really easily and share with the friends, right? And what happened in this case, the gaming publishers were more than happy to do it, because obviously it increases the sharing, their gameplay sharing, right? Which means more users can discover their games and apps, right? And it basically reduces the user acquisition cost. So much so that, sorry, the service within 6 months had like 6 million registered users, and they were adding like 1 million new players a month, right? On hundreds of games on Android and iOS, right? So this is what I'm talking about. Like if you keep your eyes and mind open, right, and you latch on to an emerging trend, right, you might be able to use it very, very profitably in your product offering and basically get that growth before anyone else out there, right? So again, this is something that I've seen a lot of companies do very, very successfully, and that basically just kickstarted that phase of growth or moved the metrics for them in such a significant way that there was no looking back, right? So this is the last bit I wanted to sort of leave you guys with. I try to keep examples very SaaS enterprise heavy. There are obviously a lot more examples in consumer space, but this is what I wanted to sort of leave you guys with. So thank you so much. This is it from my side for now. So happy to take any questions or anything else you want to know from my experience.
Anurag, one question I have: how do you identify these trends? As you spoke about that the trend is there and a few folks latch onto it. How for yourself, how do you identify those trends and how do you act for them?
Great question, Anand. So again, it is hard, right? So what I do typically is go where my users are, right, and try and see what they're talking about, right? So for example, let's say you go to Stack Overflow, you will find, for example, what some of these developers are talking about, right? What is the new thing that has come in the market, right? If I talk about consumer internet, all I have to do is basically see like some of the large consumer platforms, right? So what kind of content consumers are consuming on YouTube, right? Or maybe follow a few specific publications on Twitter, right? So for example, in travel space, I really like this newsletter from Skift, right? Which gives me absolutely all the latest and greatest trends that are playing out in travel space, right? Maybe you can subscribe to a few Substack sort of newsletters, right? Because again, some of this content might not be available on some of the mainstream stuff. Even stuff like what kind of US stocks to invest into, you can basically get a lot of good content, long form content. See, ultimately you need long form content to basically build an opinion on any trend, right? Whether it is playing out, whether it's a short-term thing, whether it's a long-term thing. So definitely look out for great newsletters, right? So for example, Ben Evans, right? He writes a beautiful newsletter. There's a paid newsletter by Ben Thompson called Strategy that again gives you a lot of good consumer insights, what is happening, what is not happening. Specific vertical focus newsletters are there. Like for example, I said Skift is a great publication in travel space, right? So a period of time, I've kind of figured out what sources work for me, right? Or what sources sort of trigger my brain the right way, right? And then basically these days I moved to Substack, right? Because again, on Substack, I find a lot of good sort of long form content, which the kind of insights you cannot get from, let's say, Twitter threads, right? So I have like in masse moved away from Twitter threads. If I have to build an opinion something, I basically go out there and actually consume a lot of Substack content, right? And that is how sort of I keep up with the trends. And one specific thing I do is specifically look at two markets, which is some trends playing out in the Valley or trends playing out in China. Specifically trends playing out in China, given my current role of travel, because a lot of interesting stuff does happen in China. that I've seen that they have kind of stayed ahead in the curve, and they do a lot of interesting things that I can basically look at and then basically try and see if I can sort of contextualize to my situation.
Yep. Thanks.
Anything else, guys?
No, just another thought on the Bitcoin again and on the emerging trends. Like and specifically in a B2B environment, right? As in a B2C environment, we can play it out by doing a bit of beta testing and putting it out to some customer. But when we are in a B2B environment, and how do you basically quantify the data? How do you get that customer voice to it? And even the customers are not so aware of this trend being out and being used by other customers, since no one has done it till, and you are the first one to do it. How do you develop that confidence also, even for your engineering team and even for your other stakeholders also?
Absolutely. Phenomenal question, Paramveer. So no good answer to that. The only answer to that is, see, ultimately, the way I think about it is, even if a trend is playing out, let's say in China or in Silicon Valley, I don't know whether it is going to locally work in my market, right? I still don't know, right? Even if there were a source of truth that is playing out in other markets, the only way to basically solve for this is basically think about your customer really, really well, think about the trend really, really well, and in your mind, even if you cannot go out and basically put some quantitative lens to it, try and pair them together, saying that if something is playing out in China and you know for sure that there is a certain behavioral aspect to your Indian customer or your Indian enterprise customer, and something is playing out in China, you try to play in your mind that do I think that this kind of thing, if I sort of put in the Indian context, will this work for my sort of end user, right? So I'll give you today's example, right? So for example, there's this ongoing theme in Make My Trip called customer delight, right? How do I delight my customers, right? And typical ideas that come to your mind was put the user's year in review, right? Okay, you have done so many flight bookings to Make My Trip in the last whatever 3 years or whatever, right? Or you come up with some obvious stuff like that. Hey, whenever you reach a successful milestone, you just put out certain kind of confetti or animations, right? Or certain obvious stuff like play out with quirky badges because Reddit does it, right? You put some quirky badges out there that you are a newbie, you are a national jet setter, so on and so forth. But do these things really solve my customer pain point? No, right? So even if I do it, these are at best optical / cosmetic changes that I might be doing, right? It is not going to move my metric. Right? So what do I do, right? So then you basically start going very, very deep. Like, what is it? Customer wants value, right? So either I have to give him seamless refunds, cancellations, etc. That will definitely delight the customer, but that's not a charter that I own as a growth commons guy. What can I do? Maybe I can give him something of value that will delight him. So I start thinking about it and thought about, my customers will definitely appreciate something like 1,000 rupees on, let's say, a Zomato Pro subscription, right? And I have a lot of user base. Would Zomato be interested in offering something like this to my user base? Maybe no, but maybe an Easy Diner would, right? Because Easy Diner is a distant number 2 in the Delhi NCR market, right? And they might be able to acquire a lot of customers through me, right? So I saw this trend of Coupon Dunya doing something, or maybe Grabon doing something. And then I started trying to pair in my mind, can I do a version of it that can work for my customer, right? So unfortunately, no easy answer to this. You have to basically play the scenarios in your mind and think very, very deeply. Can I take a trend, do a version of it that can work for my customer, right? And so that's the second part of it. The first part of it is, so that is how you build some confidence, right? First, you have to build confidence for yourself before you can even convince your stakeholders. If you understand your customer pain points really, really well, right, you're able to articulate it, narrate it very, very well to your stakeholders. And then you are able to articulate at least to yourself very, very crisply, why do you think this trend can pair with this customer pain point? I think that is 80% of the battle won, right? You will be able to, even if you don't have quantitative data, at least you have qualitative data to tell you that if I launch something like this, it might potentially work. Right. So I know for sure if I do that Easy Diner version of customer delight for my user, right, where maybe on his birthday or on his anniversary, if I throw him a freebie like this, would definitely be happy, right? I have a lot of confidence, right? So that is how I do it. No easy answer, because ultimately when you're trying to sort of build something ahead of the curve before no one else has done, there will definitely be some leaps of faith. Everything cannot be set into black and white, because if that could be done, then there was no need for product managers, right? It could just be an artificial robotic algorithm that could decide exactly what is the next thing to build.
Thank you, Raghu. Thank you so much for the answer.
Cool. Any other questions?
Guys, I think we have last few minutes. So yeah, please go ahead and shoot your questions.
So I have one question. I wanted to understand. So you talked about user researchers, right? So how can we leverage user researchers to gather these or get some insights on these trends or direct insights from customers?
So in a B2C context, actually, there are a lot of user research agencies out there. They do this for a living. It's a business model. So you can always engage a third party sort of user research organization that will be willing to sort of recruit customers for you. Then basically run the entire sort of user research process for you. What you have to do is have a very tight control on the entire process. What kind of users you want to recruit, what kind of exact sort of scenarios you want to run with the customer, whether you want to run the customer through an early prototype, or you want to run the customer through like certain scenarios on your current live product. Some of those things you can easily do in a B2C context. B2B context, I don't know a lot of organizations that actually do it. Ultimately, you have to have some kind of in-house sort of team that basically does this for you. Typically, it is the product marketing team, right, which basically takes on this responsibility. For example, I used to rely a lot on my product marketing teams to basically help me, because they run a lot of webinars, right? They run a lot of surveys, right? They do a lot of job around content distribution. They have all these survey forms going, chatbots going. So I used to use them to basically collect a lot of information on my users, right? Like who can I reach out to, right? And then I used to take the onus, or someone else in my team used to take the onus of actually sort of doing the user research for them, with them, right? So either again, same thing I would do, I would run them through some early examples of what kind of capabilities we are building, and would just try to gauge their reaction. I would not prime them one way or the other, but just show them that this is what the format will look like, right? Or maybe some kind of a prototype or a video grab of what that potential experience can look like. And then I'll just try to see their reaction, right? Or what I would do is basically I would just ask them very open-ended, like, what do you think can basically move your revenue to the next level, right? Because my problem area in that particular case was monetization, right? And then they would talk about, ki boss, tumhare fill rates kam hai, you are not able to give me enough ads, right? Other players are able to do it better. Or maybe they would talk about things like that I'm basically a social media app, I want more non-gaming ads coming onto my app, right? I don't like all the gaming ads that are coming through. And that will give me a lot of insights on how exactly I want to orchestrate the marketplace side of it, right? How should the demand, supply, matching, etc. would work? The SDK was only the final sort of last mile for sort of serving the ads. So those are some of the things I used to do. Again, user research is something, it's a very sort of tough sort of craft to sort of fine tune, because in a lot of cases, what will happen to you is you'll come back with a lot of, again, opinions, facts, but you will not find anything sort of like really, really dramatic, right? So a lot of people keep saying that, you know what, go speak to your user, right? But the user himself doesn't know what exactly he wants, right? So you have to sort of keep on doing that process over and over again with a lot of users, and then slowly we'll start seeing trends emerging. It's a hard battle, because just by talking to one or two users, you will not get those insights. You have to talk to, and slowly with time, your intuition will also start increasing. You have to probably start talk to 10, 15, 20 customers across different verticals. You have to spread the verticals. You cannot, for example, in my case, gaming is a large vertical, but then non-gaming itself is a very large vertical, which itself is split into, let's say, media apps, and then social networking apps, and then basically, let's say, a lot of live streaming apps, right? So I used to go speak to each of those individual verticals, and then hopefully in some vertical or the other, you will be able to find some good insight, right? So you might not find something in gaming, but you might find something very interesting playing out for live streaming events, right? And so on and so forth, right? So that is how it works.
Okay.
I think that's awesome. Thanks a lot, Anurag. I think we have taken more time than we asked you actually for. So thanks a lot for this wonderful session. I think a lot of points that you've covered. I think one thing that I really liked, or probably what B2B people generally do not do, is dog fooding of their own product. In
Right.
terms of obviously B2C, it's easy because as a Make My Trip employee also, or a product manager also, I
Correct.
might be also a traveler and probably be booking or Make My Trip, so that's easy for them. But for B2B, I think it's something which is not that easy or comes that easy.
It doesn't come easy. It takes
Yeah.
a lot of discipline, a lot of
Yeah,
effort to
lots of
basically
focus,
do.
and I think lots of strategic push from also the people saying that, hey, unless you kind of go about and use it, you won't know the actual pain points. You will still be at the surface. So I
Right.
think really good thoughts there. I really enjoyed some of those points really well. So thanks a lot for talking to the team. I hope it was really enriching for the team as well. So thanks for doing that. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, Nalin. Pleasure talking to you guys. It was a great experience.
Same here.
Yeah.
Same
Thank you, Anurag.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everyone. Cheers. Bye.